Welcome, everybody. Well, today we are going to be reading the second chapter of our unit, The War of 1812. And we're going to be working with some nonfiction text features that we have done this week. So right here we see the table of contents. Number 2 is what I said we're going to read today, chapter 2, The War Hawks. And this is found on page 24. So we can always see the page numbers of where to go if we have the book in front of us. So let's go ahead and get started. So, chapter 2, the War Hawks. At first, President Madison tried to keep America out of war. He tried to make a deal with the British. He asked them to stop taking American sailors. He asked them to stop trading with Native Americans, but he did not ask Congress to declare war. So remember, guys, Congress is the legislative branch, people who were elected and they could potentially make laws. They could make those big decisions. So President Madison would have to ask them to declare war for it to start. Well, guys, this made some people happy. There were many people in the United States who did not care to go to war. Most merchants and traders felt this way. They traded with Great Britain as well as other countries. A war would mean less trade between countries. It would mean sunken ships and lost goods. A war would cost them money. For this reason, as well as some others, most merchants opposed the war. So guys, I highlighted a word and I circled this picture over here, which we'll start with the picture. So below we have a caption, and this tells us more about the picture so we understand the picture, or an illustration or a map. So it says merchants in Boston, shown here, and other eastern cities wanted to avoid a war. So we saw that word a lot, merchants, and we've talked about that. But those are people who trade. They trade for a living, and they need to do this with other countries. And you can see this port right here. We've talked about that. That is where they trade and give other countries their goods and receive goods. Well, now let's talk about this other word, oppose, that I've highlighted. So let's look back at that sentence, how it's used. For this reason, as well as some others, most merchants opposed the war. What does that mean? Opposed the war. What do you think? Well, guys, if I'm uncertain when I'm reading a certain word and what it means, if it's bolded, we can take a look in the glossary, which is at the end of a story in a nonfiction text. So I'm going to come down. I found O, and I'm going to look for that word oppose. Oppose, here it is. To be against something. Okay, so opposed means to be against something. So if most merchants opposed the war, that means they were against going to war. They did not want to go to war. And we saw why. It would mean sunken ships and lost goods. If these ships sank and there were lost goods, do you think merchants would make their money? That's what they do for a living. So it makes sense why merchants opposed the war. Now let's come take a look over here. But others felt a war was needed. Okay, so there are some people who felt differently. The states out west, like Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, were closer to Native American land. The settlers in these states were scared of Native Americans. They were also angry with the British. These people were called war hawks. They made loud, angry speeches. They complained about impressment. They complained that the British were selling guns to Native Americans. They felt the United States needed to declare war. So right here, guys, the question says, what group of people were not opposed to war? And remember, opposed is against, so they were not against war. And why? What were these people called? So go ahead and look back and see if you can find it yourself before we talk about it. So they were called the War Hawks. And why? Why were they not opposed to war? Well, one, they felt a war was needed. Also, they were very angry because lots of problems were occurring. There was impressment, which you guys know what that is, when British sailors force American sailors to join the British Navy, which means they don't return home. They also complained that the British were selling guns to Native Americans, so they felt the United States needed to declare war. Here's another caption, guys, under this map. It says in 1812, the United States was much smaller than it is today. There were far fewer states. Many people who lived in the western states were war hawks who wanted to go to war with the British. So we can see where they talked about Kentucky, Tennessee, right here. That's kind of where the war hawks lived, on the west side, right here at the time. So captions are very helpful to further understand a picture. All right, so when some warhawks found out that the British were selling guns to Native Americans, it made them angry. These warhawks gave President Madison an earful. That means they had a lot to say to him. They got up in Congress and made angry speeches. They said that the United States should stand up to Great Britain. They said that Madison should ask Congress to declare war. So there's that word again, Congress, which is not actually in our glossary. But again, remember, this is the group of leaders that would make those big laws or decisions like declaring war. So here's a question. How did war hawks tell Congress they should go to war? Look back in your text. They got up in Congress and made angry speeches. So as you see, I've highlighted that particular part, the evidence that answers our question. And the more you can underline, highlight, mark, and answer, the better off it's going to help for you to remember certain facts and keep up with the comprehension, keep up with everything that's happening in the story. Well, we're going to stop there. That is the end of our second chapter. The rest is that glossary. I hope you have a great weekend, guys. There is no exit ticket because I wanted to make sure that this was emphasized, just really looking at chapter 2, understanding the war hawks and where they were coming from, how they wanted war. And I'd love to hear your opinion next week to see if you agree with the war hawks, or do you think you agree more with the merchants? And if you still stand on the side of, if I don't have to declare war, I won't. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. Bye.